What's up, everybody? It's Greg with Delta, and this is the Be the Difference podcast. This podcast is all about making you a better person in your life and in your business with coaching on sales, leadership, mindset, marketing, everything under the sun when it comes to being an entrepreneur. And we bring on guest speakers. Today, I've got the honor and pleasure of welcoming Miss Kim Hammer. Kim, how are you?
Greg, I'm good.
That is awesome. I think we're going to have a great conversation today.
I think so too. I'm really looking forward to this.
I'm excited. So for those of you that don't know Kim, on April 16th in 2009, Kim watched her 44-year-old husband take his last breath. During his illness and after his death, she was amazed by the helpful ways their coworkers, bosses, friends, and family supported them. Kim started calling their kind actions acts of love. After the death of her husband, Kim, an HR leader, noticed that managers received no guidance when navigating cancer or death on their teams. She saw how their lack of helpful tools and guidance was costly. It negatively affected employee engagement, increased turnover rates, and lowered productivity. She set out to change that. Combining her personal experience with her professional knowledge and leadership skills, Kim launched 100 Acts of Love, a consulting agency that provides tools to help leaders increase team productivity, trust, and engagement when cancer affects the whole team member. She is the author of 100 Acts of Love, A Girlfriend's Guide to Loving Your Friend Through Cancer or Loss, an easy-to-read book filled with 100 practical, quick, and effective ways to support an employee, friend, or coworker. She's an HR consultant and sought-after public speaker who lives in Los Angeles, where she tries not to bother her relatively well-behaved college-aged children. I like that.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
No, I was saying they don't like that, but it's the truth.
my oldest daughter is a senior in high school, so she starts college next year.
Yeah.
I'm frightened.
It's really interesting to watch them change. Because they go out and they live on their own.
Yeah.
And they navigate the world and they come back, November, December, they come back sort of maybe a little shell-shocked and like, I don't know how this is going. And then they come back in May and they're these different independent individuals. It's really fascinating. So enjoy the ride.
Yeah, I am actually super excited for her because I think it's going to be a big change for her.
Yeah.
And she's a very determined young woman. And so
Right.
Lily, I love you, girl. I love you, baby bug. But I was actually talking. So I'm previously married, and it's my ex-wife. We had 4 kids together. So I was teasing her the last time I was at. They live in Tampa, Florida, and I live in Dallas. And I go up to Tampa every month, sometimes twice a month. And I was teasing my ex-wife. I was like, we're the age now that we could technically become grandparents.
I know.
He's like, don't wish that evil on me.
You're like, yes, no, yes. Like, I love holding babies. Yeah. I love holding babies and I love giving them back. And that's the sign to me that you're ready to be a grandparent. But unfortunately, my being a grandparent affects my children. So I'm kind of like, I still want them to have their life before they do that doing that parenting thing. But yeah, it's very,
absolutely have a lot of life.
It's out there. It's out there.
A lot of life. Yeah.
Yep. Exactly.
I'm the same way. I love babies too. I've always been, when my kids were younger and when I was, around babies more often, everyone called me the baby whisperer because I could like pick up any baby and they just stop crying.
That's so sweet. That's so great. Yeah, that's a nice name.
Yeah, this is baby whisperer.
Baby whisperer.
I'll just give it to Greg. I just hold him his rocket, just like and pat it on the butt. Like,
yep,
you're gonna be all right.
Yep.
So you had a terrible situation that happened to you.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry about your loss. I know that this was
Thank you.
many years ago, but share, if you don't mind, being as transparent as you want, share that time frame and what that was like going through that and the epiphany, like that epiphany process when you started having all those acts of love from your coworkers, your friends, your acquaintances.
Yeah. So I will say one thing about the epiphany process. It really didn't occur till after. you're in the middle of it and you're struggling, and there were moments where I was really aware of what people were doing for us, but for the most part, it was just kind of like put one foot in front of the other, keep going, keep going. So my husband's name was Art. He was 6'6" tall. He
Oh, wow.
was yeah.
He's my kinda guy. I'm 6'7".
Okay, there you go.
Yeah.
Perfect. He was 6'6", 230, solid athlete, leader, really strong, incredible father. And, but man, when he got sick, he got sick. So one time he was sort of running these mild fevers and he was complaining that his abdomen hurt. Finally I was like, you need to go to the doctor. He went to the doctor. He had appendicitis. So he was one of those guys who just was never ill, but when he got ill, it was big. And his cancer was sort of the same thing. He wasn't feeling well. He was running these mild fevers and coughing, and we were treating lymphoma with Delsum cough syrup and ibuprofen. And then he went out for a run and he came back and he just, he was supposed to be like a 10-mile run. He came back within 20 minutes. He's like, I just can't breathe. And so in the back of our heads, when something's wrong, but you don't really kind of admit it to yourself.
Yeah.
So he made an appointment to see, we were on a HMO. He made an appointment to see his doctor and the primary care. And the primary care said, just bypass me. You need to go to see an infectious disease doctor. Something's going on, because he'd had a conversation with her earlier. And before he could even say, I want you to come, I said to him, I kind of want to go with you. And he's like, yes. And it was one of those scenes out of a movie. The doctor, after doing an exam on Art and x-raying his chest, the doctor comes in and we're sitting in the exam room and he laces his fingers together and he puts them on the exam table and we're sitting across from him and he looks at my husband and says, I think it's cancer. He couldn't confirm it because they needed to take a biopsy, but then he showed us the x-ray. And the reason that my husband wasn't able to breathe is because he had these white spots all over his lungs. And then the bottom half of his lungs were just filled, like they were just all white where they shouldn't have been. So we caught it at stage 4, which really isn't a catch at all because there isn't a stage 5. It was really super aggressive. It began to shut down his lungs big time. This was on a Friday, and by Monday he was really struggling to breathe. So we just, they did a quick surgery on him. They did a biopsy. And that's when it was diagnosed. We originally thought it was testicular cancer because he had a lump in one of his testes, but turned out it was something called testicular lymphoma, which is large B-cell lymphoma. Large B-cell lymphoma is fairly normal, but testicular lymphoma is fairly rare. And it just, we couldn't even wait for him to heal from surgery. They had to start chemo within 2 days after surgery. And that's sort of how it all began. And I remember telling people, we both are, he was working in a private school. Our kids, we live in LA and private schools are sort of one of the options that we have. And our kids were all in all these different schools. And we started to tell people, and people kept saying to us, oh my God, if you need anything, let me know. If you need anything, let me know. And at first it felt really helpful, right? Because all these people, you felt like you were getting a lot of love. You didn't know how many people cared about you. But then quickly, about 5 or 6 days after hearing that a lot, I realized how unhelpful it was. And that's sort of how the book came to be eventually. So some people stepped in and did amazing things for us, and some people stepped back. Some people didn't know what to say or what to do. And I think the hard thing, if any of your listeners have had sort of a tragedy in their life, be it cancer or loss of any kind, what happens is some of the people we expect to step in and to support us step way out. And then other people who we don't know very well often step in. And that's sort of what our story was. Some people just seemed to know exactly what to do and other people didn't. I remember I had a group of friends who were like, Kim, you need a freezer. Like, you need an extra freezer. And I was like, no, I don't want an extra freezer. Meanwhile, our refrigerator was filling up. Our freezer was full. I don't want an extra freezer. We don't need an extra freezer. It was almost like I was in denial about how bad this was. And they kept saying, you need a freezer. You need a freezer. And so finally, they just went out and bought me a freezer. And I'm so grateful that they did, because that freezer got full very, very quickly. And it was the freezer story is sort of a combination of sometimes people who are in this type of situation don't often know exactly what they need, and they need outside people kind of stepping in and taking over in a sense. But it's also a sense of really, sometimes it's just you're just trying to get through one day at a time,
Mm,
and you're not able to see how horrible the situation is that you're in because it's your situation and you can't really admit that to yourself in that moment.
mm,
Um, so yeah, so that's sort of how the whole thing started. And I think, my husband died. It's going to be 14 years in April. Um, it's almost like the lessons that I've learned from his loss and from his cancer and, being a widow and then working in HR and moving into this sector of supporting managers who are dealing with this. It's like the lessons deepen.
mm,
Um, and so they become more a part of me. And I think that's something that we often underestimate when we're looking at lessons that we're going to learn or lessons that we think we're going to learn. It takes time for them to really sink in and for them to become a part of you. And my situation was really no different than that.
yeah. As you're telling your story, I'm thinking about this freezer, right? And I was like, I'm thinking like I'm trying to put myself in your position, and I could 100% visualize like being in that position as people you need a freezer. And I'm like, I don't need a freezer. Like what I need is for my loved
Yes,
one to get better. That's what I need.
exactly.
And they're like, no, 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 you're gonna need a freezer.
Right.
And like I can think of people in my life that are those kind of people. They're like, no, you know what? I'm just gonna get you a freezer. And I'm just like,
Yes.
no, 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 don't get like I don't need it.
I
Like
don't need it. Don't.
I
But
don't need it. And
yeah,
then it ends up being like, oh man, that's a game changer. Thank you so
yeah,
much. Like
yeah,
later on, just real that realization. Um, and as you're telling me, I was I was thinking about this, like I can see myself doing the same exact.
yeah. And, you don't realize how crazy you are in that
Yeah,
moment, right? You don't realize how stressed you are because it's you.
yeah.
And the focus was on my husband, and early on, I mean, right when he was diagnosed, there was, sort of like this when we started getting help from our friends, there was, like, this unsaid rule, and the unsaid rule was, "Your job, Art, is to beat this cancer. My job is to hold down everything else."
Mhm.
And so we never talked about it, we never discussed it, but his cancer was so serious and so bad that was really all he could do anyway.
Yeah,
And so, I didn't realize how stressed out I was. I didn't realize how tired I looked. I didn't realize how quickly I was speaking sometimes. I didn't realize how slow I was to react sometimes. But all of our friends saw this. And those are the people who you need to rely on to step in.
yeah.
So yeah, it's one of those things, and I want to talk about this about why that phrase is the least helpful phrase. Um, but let me finish the story. So he beats cancer, he beats it. And both of us, no, of course, this is new. We've never had cancer before, so we don't know this, but we think that after you are finished with a cancer diagnosis, you get this new lease on life and you're excited and there's no more fear. And you're just, you're taking the bull by the horns and twisting it, flipping it upside down. And that was not what happened. And there were so many nights we would lie in bed and look at each other. Can I swear? Is it okay if I
Yeah,
swear?
yeah, say whatever you want, please do.
Okay, okay. So we would look at each other and we'd be like, "What the fuck just happened?" Like, really, like, what just fucking happened? You know? So there were so many nights we were just kind of shell shocked.
Yeah,
And then as any disease does, it brings out the best in your marriage and it brings out the worst in your marriage.
yeah,
And there were a time that we had to decide, it was probably more me than him. I decided I wanted to stay in the marriage because I was pissed. Like I was kind of like, here was my husband. He was the man. As much as I didn't like to believe we had the stereotypical marriage, we did in a lot of ways. He was the provider. He was the protector. He was filling this role. How dare he go and get sick? Right. And so I was really mad at that. I then also, to be fully transparent, took on the martyr role. So I was like, I'm doing all this. I did all this for you, and I'm not being repaid. So there was that piece of it. There was his shame, right? So he is the man. He's got these kids, and he's a very, involved father, and he gets sick and he can't do anything. So he's dealing with the shame and the guilt.
Mhm.
of that. People are there, God bless some of our friends, but they were like, did you bring this on yourself? There's a whole theory out there that if you're not healthy mentally, you bring on illnesses into your body. And, so he's carrying around that guilt. Like, what kind of person am I that I brought on stage 4 cancer, or I should have caught it earlier? I should have paid more attention. So we're grappling with this after we got the cancer-free diagnosis. And it takes, about 8 months for us to kind of settle in and be like, okay, I'm sorry, make amends and to just figure out how we're going to move forward.
Yeah.
Um, so we do that. We make that decision. We stay together and we kind of recommit to each other. And then less than 2 years later, the cancer came back. It came back faster and went to stage 4 quicker. And 4 months after 4 months after the diagnosis, he died. So that was sort of that's our trajectory. And yeah, I guess I just want people to know that this whole idea that after cancer happens, I think it's along the lines of what I talked about earlier about it takes time to learn the lessons.
Mm.
I think that same thing occurs when you have had cancer yourself. It takes time to kind of understand what happened, to work through the emotions that come up when you are dealing with a life or death situation, and then to kind of mold them into something that becomes a part of you.
Yeah. Yeah, I can attest to that 'cause my mom had breast cancer when I was a kid. This was
Oh,
back when this was back when this was, like, in the '90s when, like, breast
yeah.
cancer was, like, way worse.
Yeah.
She ended up having to get she got her whole breast removed,
Right.
and, and then she had chemotherapy. The chemotherapy was so bad, that even to this day, she's got burns, like, her skin is so burned
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
like, just terrible on that side, and so they were gonna do reconstructive surgery to create her another breast, but they can't 'cause the skin's not viable.
Oh,
It
wow.
wouldn't be able to hold. So
Yeah.
she wears a bra that has, like, just a prosthetic
Yeah. Yeah.
prosthetic,
Yep.
breast in it, and so we would go we would go around the house wearing this thing and, like, with these with these fake breasts
That's
and, like
awesome.
her bras and stuff,
Yep,
and,
yep.
she was a good sport about it.
Yeah,
She didn't get mad. She played it. She was like, "You guys are sick."
yeah, yeah,
We're like,
exactly.
We're your kids. You made us."
Exactly, exactly. "Thanks, mom." Yeah, and what's great about that story is that I think a lot of people think when they think about cancer, when you're from the outside, when you're a cancer muggle or what we call a death muggle,
Mm.
right? From the outside, someone's gonna hear this and be like, "Oh, that's horrible. I cannot believe you did that." But from someone who's dealt with cancer, oh my gosh, there's so many we used to joke about how we were gonna go into when my husband had no hair. We
Yeah.
used to joke about how we were gonna go into a restaurant and say that we found hair in the food. We just knew it wasn't there. Just watch the people squirm, right? Just be like, oh, and even now, I just went to Camp Widow, and I know many people out there are going, you're what? So Camp Widow is a weekend camp. It is the most healing, entertainment, social, fun event that I've ever been to as a widow. I've been going for off and on for the last 13 years actually.
Mm.
And one of the things that we get to do is we get to make death jokes all the time and we
Oh, yeah.
crack each other up,
Yeah.
you know? So I think that there's a light side to this that people don't often understand, but I always encourage people, like if you're the humorous person in the friendship or in the workship, whatever it is, then continue to be that humorous person. Just because they have cancer or they're going through something really life-changing doesn't mean that you have to all of a sudden bring yourself down to that serious tenor. That
Yeah.
person needs you to show up exactly how you've always showed up in their life.
Yeah. And then say something really dark and then look
Yeah.
at, like, too soon.
Yeah, exactly. 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 We all need those people in our
Yeah.
lives for sure. For
I
sure.
would definitely be that person. I know too soon.
You're like too soon. You're like, maybe. Okay. I'll try
Maybe.
again in 2 weeks.
Okay. Give me back in a week.
Yep. Exactly.
No, yeah, that's, I mean, I think that's why the military, um, we were so I mean, we just 1, we rib on each other, but 2, with this terribly morbid jokes.
Yes.
And it's because we're constantly especially deployed, man, we would make some terrible jokes.
Yep.
And
Yep.
because it's like we're constantly in that life or death situation,
Yeah.
and it really does it brings, like, brevity and,
It
like,
does.
to life when everything's so serious and especially during difficult times when someone's passed away, like a soldier we know had passed away,
Yep.
or there was attack, we don't know if someone's gonna survive, and then there's always that one guy that's like that makes a joke about it, and you're like
Yeah.
everyone, like, kinda looks over before you know it, the whole room's cracking up.
Exactly.
So
And that's it. Yeah, and that's the thing that we all need, I think, that we forget. We think it's cancer. It's really serious. And yes, it is cancer and it is very serious, but the humor is so needed,
yeah.
especially because there's always more people around being serious about it than really kind of, "Hey, I'm really sorry this is happening to you, and oh my god, I've got the funniest joke to tell you," right? Um, so I do wanna talk about why not to say, "If you need anything, let me know." So
Yeah, go ahead,
this
go
is
ahead, go ahead.
this is a phrase that everybody says, and if you're listening and you said it, it's okay, because 'cause I'm gonna tell you why it's not a good thing to say. Right, exactly, because I was exactly the same way. And even now, it's this thing that just sometimes, like, I have to catch it before it comes out of my mouth.
Yeah,
So there are 4 reasons why it's not a great phrase. The first one is it doesn't connect you to what's happening. And I think this is often the hardest for most of us to connect into,
yeah,
is that feeling of like, "Oh my gosh, someone I care about is their person has died, or they have a life-threatening illness," because honestly, if they don't treat the cancer, they're gonna die. Um, so there's this moment where we don't wanna connect. It's hard to connect. It hurts to connect, but that's exactly what that person really needs. They need you to see them in the moment and say, "Holy cow, like, I don't even know what to say." They need you in there with them because whatever it is they're going through, it feels really isolating, right? It's just this, it's like, oh my God, my body is turned on me. It's doing like, it just feels really, really isolating. And to know that someone is hearing what you're saying is really important. And that phrase doesn't do that. It goes immediately into action. And there's nothing wrong with action, but we'll talk about how to phrase it differently.
I
The
already
se-
have an idea. Let
okay,
me test it before you
go
tell.
for it. Go for it.
No, I would say, like, instead of saying, "Hey, if you need anything, let me know," I would say, "What can I do?" I would just ask directly, like, what can I do for you right now?" Or like, "How
Like,
can I help?"
okay, I'm gonna give you, if there's a score of 5, I'm gonna give you, like, 3.5, 3 and 3/4 for that, because that's up the right alley. You're absolutely
Okay.
up the right alley, and it's because you added "right now" to the
Yeah,
question to the question. So, the second reason it's not helpful is, what is anything? Like,
yeah.
when my husband was diagnosed, I had an old toddler, so a 4-year-old. Did that mean that you're gonna take your brand new, just cleaned car up to preschool and pick up my vomiting toddler? Or
Mm.
did you mean that you'd be happy to drop off a bottle of wine? Right? So anything is just too big a word. We can't wrap our heads around it. I can't think of anything. When I think of something, it's this random thing. So the third reason it's not helpful is because now you've put the pressure inadvertently, you've put the pressure on the person you're trying to help to come up with something that they think you might be able to do. So it's like, I didn't know I needed pasta till the water was boiling. I didn't know I needed a child picked up until the school called. I didn't know I needed this pie chart until I remembered, at 12 midnight that I have this report supposed to get done the next day. So, the trying to ask the person who's already under a great amount of stress, like the windows have become the floor, the door is someplace on the ceiling, their whole world is upside down. Asking them to find something that they can need help with is a challenge for them.
Mm.
And then the fourth reason it's not helpful is because now you're asking someone to ask for help. And I have not met a society yet. I've interviewed across the world in different places. I've not met a society yet where people are like, yeah, 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 no, I need help. Can you help me? Like, we're really good at that. And definitely as Americans, we are not good at that.
Yeah.
And so, there's a ton of people who love to help. We all love to help. But when it comes to asking for help, we are phenomenally bad at it. And so now you have this person who's under this incredible amount of stress, may have figured out one thing that they need. And now you're asking them to call you and ask you to do something, ask for help, and ask you to do something that they're not even sure that you really want to do because you said anything. So that's why that phrase is really not helpful at all. Now, what you said, Greg, is helpful because you put in the word today. So you said, "How can I help today?" Or how can I you said right now, I think.
Yeah,
How can I help?
what can I do for you right now?
What can I do for you right now? That's a brilliant question because right now is right now. Like it's right here in this moment.
Mm,
And I can probably think of something right now that you can do. Right. You're like, I got a pan in the kitchen that really needs to be cleaned. So I'd be like, you can do that. Right. So that's an easy thing to wrap your head around. What I often say to people is be very specific about the kind of help you're willing to offer and then offer more than once. So, you can come back and you can say to them the next day, what can I do for you right now? Or next time you see them, what can I do for you right now? If you're repeating that phrase over and over and over again, there's two things that happens to the person's brain. One, they remember because they remember their focus is on dealing with what they're dealing with. It's not on remembering that you said that you'd bring over, clean sheets or something. So, really being clear on offering more than once. So, you're reminding them over and over again. And two, you are proving that you are a safe person. So, being that safe person means they mean what they say. They're not just saying it because it's a nice thing to do.
mm,
We often don't feel like we deserve the help and we're reluctant to accept it. We feel like we have to pay people back for it, which is a whole different thing. Um, so really being when you're saying it over and over again, you're telling them, I'm here, you're worthy, this is how I want to help, please ask. And that gives them a sense of this security. And it's really subtle. It's not like they're going to be like, oh, I feel so safe, you know, but it's very subtle. It gives them a sense of security. They know how they can reach out to you, they know what you're willing to do. And if they need that thing, they will call you. So the combination of honoring where they're in, sitting in it with them for just a moment, saying, I'm so sorry. I know it feels like that's not saying very much, but really you're looking in them in the eye. And when you're saying, I'm so sorry this is happening, I don't know what to say, you're speechless, that's really powerful. And then following it up with being specific and then offering more than once. You've got a really nice combination of how you can support someone dealing with whatever it is they're dealing with.
that's so powerful, and you're correct in saying that. I know that I've been through times where I've been like, hey, let me know, is there any way I can help, and then and like they never reach out, and it's not that I'm not like, I'm serious. Like if they're like, hey, I need you to come cook some dinner for me and the kids, I'd be like, all right, I'm on my way over.
Yeah.
Like
Yep.
I would do it. But being more specific, not realizing the amount of mental strain that they're on, like their brains at max.
Yes.
It's a full cup. There's no
Yep.
extra information in there that's going to be able to process in their conscious mind. So just being like, hey, I would almost not like now thinking about it. I would be like, hey, do you need me to go get groceries? Do you need me to clean the
Yes.
house? Do you need me to do some dishes for you? Do you need me to cook some
Yes.
dinner? Maybe for I can cook. I can do some meal prep for the next few
Yep.
nights.
Exactly.
And like throw out some suggestions. That way they'd be like, oh, actually, that would be very helpful. Like, okay,
Ex
all right,
exactly. You
you come to
got
the
it.
kitchen, see what food you got, and then I'll go grocery shopping real quick, and I'll
Yep.
eat next couple nights food.
Yep.
Yeah,
Okay. One more convert down. Woohoo!
yeah,
700 million more to go.
yeah. That makes a lot of sense, and like
Yeah.
understanding like how the human mind works, and well, I mean, my limited understanding, but doing enough of studies and talking about like how you can only there's only so much that your conscious mind can pay attention at one time. It's like five things plus or minus two. So,
Exactly.
average of five, man, the trauma is taking up like four of them.
Exactly. Exactly. The trauma's taking up 4.5. So you got point 0.5 in there. Exactly.
So
Exactly.
no, that makes a lot of sense.
And I really want people to know, look, if you said that to someone recently, you can go back.
Yeah.
Like you don't have to be like, "Oh my gosh, I screwed up. Now I have to wait for the next person to help." You can go back and say, "Hey, I'm here." And what I love about that, when you go back and you say something to somebody, it's like, okay, let me tell you this really quick story.
Right.
So I LL Bean. My husband was from Maine. My mother-in-law shopped at LL Bean. She loves LL Bean. It's this outdoor store in Maine. They ship all over the world now. Um, but I bought an LL Bean suitcase, which I ran over. I totally ran over it. My fault. Put it behind the car, forgot it was there, went to leave, rolled over it. Sent it back to them saying, "Hey, can you just fix the wheels? Like it's just the wheels that need to be fixed." They sent me a whole new suitcase. A whole new suitcase. I was so like, this it was unnecessary. They didn't need to do it, But anytime I need like a fleece or a flannel or like flannel sheets or something, I shop at LL Bean, and I tell that story a lot.
Yeah.
So they got a lot of bang. They sent me one suitcase that probably cost them $150, and they've probably made well over several $1,000s from me because of my loyalty to them, because of that suitcase. And I'm sure that they've made more money because I've talked about their bags and their flannel sheets to other people.
Yeah.
So when I think about that, you want to think of the same thing when you go back. When you go back to someone who's struggling and you said the wrong thing, and you go back in and you go, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry I said the wrong thing. Here's what I can do for you." Like that brings their loyalty to you, and they're more likely to call you because they get that you get it.
Yeah.
Right? So that's the thing, is if you can prove that you get it on some level, that just, even them knowing that you get it, relieves them from this pressure. They look forward to seeing you. They just like being in your presence because they know that you get it, and they don't have to put out all this extra energy for you. So if you've made that mistake, go back. Like,
Yeah.
that's the beauty of it. You can go back.
That's so powerful. And as you're talking about LL Bean, I'm thinking about my mom liked LL Bean too. So she used to always buy LL Bean stuff, at always at, outlet malls. She's
Yes.
always at an outlet mall.
Yep, yep,
She's like,
yep, yep.
she was like, "This is LL Bean. This is really great stuff."
Yeah.
I'm like, "I don't
It's
know about that, mom."
it's not the most fashionable stuff. Like, I'm not
No.
buying my clothes from them, but when you need a flannel shirt or a fleece or a flannel sheet or something, they
Yeah.
have some sturdy, sturdy stuff, and they guarantee it. Yeah, so, okay, good.
That's
We're LL Bean
that's
fans.
yeah, LL Bean, I love it. So, and I wanna tell a story real quick because
Mhm.
just I wanna get backwards track a little bit
Okay.
to the joking, the humor, the
Okay.
one time because I remembered, when I was young, I was 16 years old actually. So I had a growth spurt that I went from like 5'8" to 6'4" like overnight.
Oof.
Like growing
Wow.
pains were the worst. I was
Yep.
always in, like I was literally like always in pain. And
Yeah.
so out of nowhere, like I just started showing up to places and people were like,
Right.
like, "Damn, Gregory, what happened to you?"
Right.
And my mom's like, my mom even noticed one day. She didn't even realize it, but one day she said she were in church and like all the kids were coming from Sunday school coming back into the chapel, and she said she could see my head above everybody else. It was like, "How tall did you get?" And she's
Like,
like, "I didn't
"Wait a minute."
realize it." So I not naturally as a young kid, I'm 16 years old. I'm super self-conscious. Like
Yeah.
I was 5'8", 145 pounds, and then
Right.
I was 6'4",
Yep.
145 pounds.
Right, right, right.
And I was like, I was literally like a baby giraffe, just
Yeah.
arms and legs, and everyone, and I'm already a self-conscious kid. I'm going through puberty,
Right,
all this stuff, and like
right.
everyone's coming up to me everywhere I go. It still happens now.
Yeah.
Do you play basketball? And now it's like, do you play
Yes.
football?
Yep,
Are you a football player? And
yep,
I'm like, do
yep.
you want an autograph? And they're like,
Yeah.
yeah. And I'm like, I don't play for a team, but here you go.
Exactly, but yep, exactly. Or you get, "How's the weather up there?"
Yeah. How's the weather?
Yep,
I always got, do you play basketball? And it was all the time. And I didn't play
yep,
basketball. It was terrible.
yeah,
So uncoordinated. And so I went to a funeral and the guy that had passed away was a neighbor. It was like 3 houses down. That was a
okay,
very long friend of our family, Mike Fanara. And he had an older son because they were a much older couple, but they were friends with my mom. That my mom and them used to hang out all the time. And then after Mike died, his wife Sherry started working with my mom. They were psychologists together.
okay.
And so the son, who was like much older, hadn't seen me since I was like 8 years old.
Right,
And
right,
the son was like 5'2", 5'3", real short
right,
man.
right,
And so this man walks up to me, and I don't even recognize him because I didn't see him since I was a kid. But he's like,
right.
"Hey," he's like, "Gregory," and I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, yeah, I can't remember. I think he's like John Fanar. He's like, "John Fanar, man." I'm like, "John." I'm like, "Man, I've seen you forever." I'm like, "Yeah, I don't even recognize you." He's like, "I don't recognize you." He's like, "You play basketball?" And it hit me out of nowhere. I just had this thought. And I was like, I'm so sick and tired of people asking me if I play
Yeah.
basketball, especially short people. That's just
Yeah.
profiling. You know what I'm saying? So I
Yep.
very quickly was like, "No, man, do you play miniature golf?" And I shook his hand and just looked him just dead in the eyes.
That's
And
brilliant.
everybody in the chapel, like, we're, like, getting ready to start
That
the funeral
is
service.
brilliant. Just burst out
Everybody
laughing.
died laughing.
Yep, yep,
Everybody,
yep.
and he got
That's
so mad.
brilliant. Yep, yep. That's
He
brilliant.
was like
Well, I think, I think this brings up something that's really important is if we're not careful, we say really stupid things.
Yeah,
And we don't mean to. We're not vicious about it, but we're thoughtless.
yeah,
And so one of those things, is stay strong. Or, I remember I was 4 or 5 weeks out after Art died, and someone said, "Oh, Kim, don't worry. You're beautiful. You're young. You'll get married again." Like, I was like, "Oh, I don't have to worry about that then. You're right. Why am I
yeah.
so sad?"
"Hey, when you're ready,
Um,
there's this new dating app. I can show y'all."
exactly. Exactly, exactly. So, I think that people, they mean well, and in your case, something my husband and I used to talk about all the time, when you're tall, it's something that people admire.
Yeah,
And so almost as a way to and I don't really understand the psychology behind it, but when they admire something, it's almost like they need to somehow engage.
yeah,
I have a friend who really is a natural blonde, and she says, people are always like, "Well, you don't have that problem. Well, you don't have that problem," because they're making an assumption about who she is based on how she looks. And oftentimes they're sometimes mean. They're like, "You're just blonde. You don't have to worry about it." Like she's a very smart woman. She has a really powerful job. And
yeah,
she said, a couple years ago, or sorry, a couple before we met, a couple decades ago, she dyed her hair brunette because she was so tired of people judging her. So I
yeah,
think I think what happens is we say, when we admire something like your height, we say things that are inappropriate that show that we're like, we just want to engage. Somehow, if we engage with a tall person, we're better people. I don't know what that's about.
I know,
Um,
I get approached all the time in public,
I'm so sure. I'm
all the
so
time.
sure. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
And then the other side is when we're uncomfortable, right? When we're uncomfortable with someone who's sick or who's just lost someone really important and we know we need to say something, we often say rather than connecting, right? Because if someone come up to you and said, I've always wanted to be 6'7", and, "What are you, about 6'7"? "Yeah, I always wanted to be 6'7", and I totally admire your height." That's a way different vibe
yeah,
than what people are saying. So when someone comes up to me and says, I'm so sorry you're a widow," that must have been a really difficult thing. They're acknowledging the difficulty. They're stepping into it with me as opposed to just brushing it off. And that when people brush it off, it's really painful. It's painful for the person who they're brushing it off with, but it's also painful for the person who's brushing it off because in the back of their heads, they know that's not the right thing to say, but they just don't know what to say. So
yeah,
they just, and they feel the need to say something.
yeah.
So yeah, yeah. I remember those conversations.
That was a masterful transition, and just add an addition into that. Man, I could I could tell you talked about this a lot. I love it. That was good. That's well done. I'm
Thank you.
serious, it was really good.
Here to serve.
Yeah, I love it, I love it. So you went through this entire experience,
Mhm.
and you realize that there's a lot of people that stepped up. You realize people that didn't really step up, but,
Yeah.
um, how did you get from there to writing the 100 Acts of Love? There's all these different acts that they can do. Was it like did you document the process? Was it,
There
was it go ahead.
It's funny that you asked because I kept a blog,
Okay.
called artnagel.blogspot.com. It's still up, and I'm a little embarrassed because the spelling errors on that are atrocious, but whatever. Um, and I went back because I wasn't sure what I had been doing, and I realized I did start saying, "Hey, this is how you can be helpful." What happened was during the process after he died, I started to get really resentful. I would be like, I'd see people who would purposely ignore me. I'd be like, really? Like, my husband's dead and you don't have the courage to say anything to me. I got really, really resentful. And then somewhere along the line, I had to admit to myself that I was the same person before Art got sick. I said, if you need anything, let me know to countless other people.
Yeah.
I never said, he's in a better place, but I would say, "I'm sorry for your loss," and just kind of leave it at that. I didn't know how to connect with someone, who was hurting. I remember saying my friend in high school died, and I remember going through the receiving line, and talking to his parents and being like, "I admire how well you're holding up." I mean, that's just so painful, right? They weren't holding up. They were at the funeral of their child, so looking back at my own behavior, I saw that I didn't know what I was doing or was saying. And then I started to do a little research, and there wasn't a lot of stuff out there. And for me, what people did and said that was really helpful helped me so much. I mean, it really made a difference. It made a difference in the life of when my husband was alive. It made a difference in the lives of my kids. It made a difference in the lives of myself and the life of myself, and also our community. Our community came together, and people loved being part of that community. They'll say, "Oh, I'm going to Kim's tonight to do this." Oh my gosh. Well, when you do that, make sure you there were people talking about us and figuring out how to help us. So it was this beautiful thing that happened. And I so wanted people to have the tools to know how to show up, because I think that we all think that we don't matter. We underestimate our value to each other. I often say we should all have funerals way before we die, so we can see, so we can learn and really hear how we've affected other people. And all those people, someone sent me $10, no return address. Her name is Leah. I'm hoping that someday she'll hear one of the podcasts I've been on. $10. That's 2 Starbucks coffee if you just go straight black. And it was so moving to me. Someone put a cooler by the front door the second time Art was sick. So neither of us had to answer the door every single time a meal came. That was really helpful. It gave me the option to engage, right? I didn't always want to engage, but when someone shows up with a meal, you feel like you need to engage because they did take the time to show up for a meal. So you're exhausted, you're tired, you don't want to talk to anyone, but you've got to accept this lasagna because it's the meal that you have to feed your children tonight. So the cooler by the front door was so powerful, right? The friend who sat next to me while I sobbed, like hysterically sobbed 4 weeks after Art died. I'm at the school picking up my kids from an overnight camping trip, and it's late. It's like 8 p.m., 9 p.m. And I'm just sobbing. And she didn't try to fix it. She didn't try to make it better. She literally said, "Is it okay if I come sit next to you?" And then she said, "Is it okay if I put my arms around you?" And I just, the tears ran. She did this once. She did this once, and I remember it. I remember that moment. So I want people to have the tools, whether you want to do that kind of thing, whether you want to hold someone who's dealing with this incredible, painful event in their life, or whether you just want to drop off a gas card. I wanted people to know that these small little things that you do really matter, and that you're helping to build a foundation of that's going to be part of their new life. So that's how the book came to be. I was terrified to write it.
Oh,
Um,
I bet.
yeah, it was one of those things. I remember I would work, and I would go into work, and I would make a deal with myself that I had to spend the first 17 minutes at work writing. And so that's what I did. I could only manage 17 minutes, because after that, like the little things in my head, you're a bad writer, you don't know what you're doing, nobody wants this. If someone had wanted it, it would have been written already. You don't know what you're doing. Just that those words were coming at me, but I could hold them off for 17 minutes. And so that's how I wrote it. I had a vision for how I wanted it to look, because I wanted it to be really easy to access. I didn't want people to have to read paragraphs or about my whole story. In fact, my story isn't even in there. It's just, the book is just full of tips. So I wanted someone to be able to open it up and to be like, okay, help her kids be heroes, so I can maybe her kids and I can make a cake for her. Close the book and then go take action. I wanted it to be something that's also really pretty to look at.
That's like really insightful to think about it like in that sense.
Oh,
It's because
well,
it's just like, what can I do? And you don't even know. It's just like a helpful guide. Okay, cook them this, that, or the other, or
yeah,
go drop off a gas card, or hey,
exactly.
like that's amazing.
Well, I wrote it for myself. I
Yeah,
am not, look, if I have to sit down and read 20 pages of stuff, I will do it. But please, if I can bold, underline, have large font, I'm that girl.
yeah.
And so, or that woman, however you want to phrase it. So, I wanted to write something that I could that people like me could use.
Yeah.
And so that's how the book came about.
I love that. So is there helpful like phrases that people can say?
There are. There's
Oh man.
so the first tip in the book is the only tip that has its own chapter, and it is, if you need anything, let me know. So we've already, you guys already got
You got the first
actual
chapter, guys.
yeah, exactly, at
You're
the first
welcome.
chapter. Exactly. You're welcome. So the book is arranged in chapters. So there's one called How to Be a Human Being and Not a Human Doing. So that's about how to engage in fun ways with this person. There's a chapter on what to say and a chapter on what not to say. So I offer after I talked to, I can't tell you how many widows and I can't tell you how many people with cancer. And the phrases that are in the book are the top phrases that people said, just don't say them anymore. Just don't say them. And then I have it organized by category. So if you want help with food, there's a whole section of food. If you want help with car transportation, we often forget, like when you're stressed out, when you've got something big going on and your car doesn't work, like your car not working on a regular basis is already stressful enough. So changing the oil, getting their registration, but putting gas in their cars, really helpful ways. We have a section about kids. I have a section about, let's see, car, kids, work, how to help if you're not around. So if you're long distance, far away. So I just wanted to put it in easy section so people could pick something that they're really good at. Entertainment, what you can do to help them with entertainment. Yeah, I just wanted to make it really easy to access. I didn't want someone, I've heard people say, "Oh, I haven't sat down and read your book." I'm like, "Dude, just open up a page." Like that's, there's not a lot of reading to do in this book. You just open up a page and then you read it and then you go do whatever it is. So I want it to be really easy.
Yeah. That's impressive. I love that. And and I like as you're talking about it, I'm like, what else could be done? What other like helpful books like that? It's just like
How
that
about a
you could
dating
have.
book?
Uh, yeah, there you go.
Boyfriend's
Date
guide, a boyfriend's guide to dating, a boyfriend's guide to getting her to say yes.
or
And it's
a boyfriend's guide to 100 romantic date ideas. Hmm.
yeah. Yep, it could be like chicken soup of the soul. I should probably do something with that. 100 acts of dating, 100 acts of love, a boyfriend's guide, 100 acts of love, a girlfriend's guide, 100 acts of love, a kid's guide, a parent's guide.
Oh,
Officially I have adult children. My youngest just turned 21 last week. And, parenting kids, you're still always parenting, but
yeah.
parenting adult children is very different, and it requires a different skill set, and it requires one of them being to keep your mouth shut most of the time, and it requires different ways that you show love, right? So that's another way to do it. Wow. Oh, Greg, I don't
I
need
feel the
the extra
juices.
work.
I feel the
I
juices.
know they're coming. They are for sure.
I like this. I like this. Um, Kim, if
Yes.
anybody wants to, I mean, you already talked about your blog, which, hey, if you listen to this, go check out that blog.
Yeah, but you
Uh,
gotta check, but check out the more recent one. Like I'm still a little embarrassed. I've been trying to decide whether or not I'm gonna go in and redo it, like,
and
correct
edit
all
some
the
of the.
mistakes, but that was sort of where I was, right? So my head was fuzzy. Like I'm not a great spell checker to begin
I
with,
think
and art.
leaving it in its authentic version.
I think that's sort of what I'm feeling like. I kind of
Yeah.
feel like this is where my head was at, and yeah, I got confused with there, and there. I know the difference, and I just have to. I'm toying with leaving it as
Yeah.
a sort of as a part of a monument of where I was when I was going through this.
How therapeutic was that to write and do a blog?
Really
I
therapeutic.
bet.
I did it. It was part of. I had the first time I did it. There were no pictures, so I did it from 2006 to 2007 when he first had cancer. Um, and I talked to him about it because he was a fairly private person, and so he wasn't running around telling people about what's happening. But I needed to do it because I needed to know that the feelings I was having weren't crazy.
Mm.
And sometimes they were. The second time I did it, it's really interesting. The summer before, my birthday's in August, and the summer that August, he got me a book by Annie Leibovitz. And in the book, she documented Susan Sodenheim and her death. So she documented her having cancer. She documented her dead body. And I was so moved by that. And I told my husband that I was really like, I really kind of wanted to get into photography. I just thought that would be a really fun thing. I just want to start capturing things and capturing moments. And then that Christmas where he was sick, he got me a camera. And then of course he was diagnosed and I documented the hell out of it. There's so many pictures I didn't even post. And it was really powerful for me. It was almost like it gave me the space to witness what was happening.
Mm.
I didn't always go back and read it, but it just to have the pictures and have the opportunity to say, this is what today is like. And then to know that tomorrow would be different, and I didn't know how it would be different. Would it be different because I'd feel worse? Would it be different because he'd get sicker? Would it be different because I'd feel better? Would it be different because, he'd start to come back after the chemo? I never really knew how it would be different, but there was always a faith that it would be different and that would be okay. So yeah, the documentation of that was really very cathartic for me. And I'm really glad I did it because it's amazing how much you forget.
Yeah.
And I go back and I read that and I'm like, wow, right, that happened.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing. Thank you so much, Kim, for sharing your
No,
story.
thank you. This
This
has
has
been
been
so great.
this has been a great conversation. I've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed it.
Me
And
too.
I know the audience that's listening, I know they've enjoyed it too. And
Yes. So I do want to tell them, if you all want to know 4 other things never to say to anybody dealing with cancer or loss, you can go to 100actsoflove.com, and that's the number 100. So 100actsoflove.com/ what not to say, no caps, no spaces, nothing, what not to say. And you can download the free download there. It says, there's 5 phrases never to say and what to say instead. And it also gives you a little bit lesson about why they're not helpful. So you can start to see when you want to say something that isn't one of those 5 things, you can start to sort of figure out what it is that you want to say based on why those phrases are not helpful.
yeah. That's very
And if
kind
you're
and generous of you to share that with the audience.
Oh, yeah,
Appreciate
I so want people to be equipped. I
that.
so want people to be equipped. It's just this happens. We can't ignore it. It happens in our lives. If it hasn't happened to you yet, it's just a matter of time. And I
Yeah.
want people to feel like they can at least know what to say, that they have that tool, those tools. So yeah, thank you.
And if anyone wants to follow you or learn more, or just kind of see what else you got going on next, what's the best place to follow you at or connect with
One on Instagram. I'm at 100 Acts of Love on Instagram. I am launching a YouTube channel next month. So that's very exciting. You'll be able to find me at 100 Acts of Love on YouTube. And then if you are a business who's looking to help your managers be empathetic as well as productive, which is always that kind of push and pull when someone is dealing with loss or cancer at work, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. And I'm under Kim T. Hamer at LinkedIn.
That is fantastic. Thank you so much, Kim, for coming on board. For those of you watching, do me a favor. Go buy 100 Acts of Love from Kim right now. Go check out the book. Go support
Thank
Kim.
you, Greg. I so appreciate that. Thank you.
You're very welcome. The next ask is share this content with somebody else so somebody else can go buy her book too. So thank you. So
Yes,
this is
please.
something that's very valuable. Like this is something that everyone can learn from, everyone can have value from. And if you haven't experienced this kind of trauma, like you're saying, it will happen in your life. It's gonna
Mhm.
happen that something
Yeah.
close to you is gonna pass away. And being equipped to be able to provide more value to that person, you can literally like change a life. You could help them immensely.
Amen to that. Yep.
So,
Amen to
uh,
that.
make sure you share the content. It takes 60 seconds to rate, review, subscribe, and share, and we greatly appreciate it. But it means the world to both Kim and I. This has been the Be the Difference podcast. I'm your host, Greg Birch. Until next time, we'll see you.